Hey, happy holidays. How appropriate this video is sitting next to the fires of hell here, yeah? Digital fires. Two cells. This video might trigger somebody. I hope it doesn't. I hope they can keep a calm, logical mind. So, Mara and Satan, right? And this video is not really about that. I've only ever been interested in what's simple, logical, and wise. And of course, reducibly simple. I mean, it has to be. It has to follow reason. Mara, by the way, is nothing other than a Pali word for, it's personification of evil or the devil. There is, of course, Jesus being tempted in the desert, and of course, I'm sure the Christians will get upset for me saying this, but this is nothing other than the psychophysical self at war with the transcendental self. Both the Greeks and Indians, doesn't matter what tradition, as well as the Egyptians, said there's two within us. Plato said this, there are two within us, and of course this is the case. There's the existential self and the transcendent self. In the case of the radio analogy, it would be the broadcast versus the signal. Of course, there's no signal in the radio, right? So, and there's also two in ancient pashas that says, the self is at war with what is not the self. This is also, too, the reason why we conventional human beings, not me anyway, find it so amazing that, like, these super rich and super beautiful people are, like, so possessed of angst. It's like, why is this person so miserable? And they have all the money in the world and all the beauty in the world. It's because they see themselves as that thing in the mirror, which of course is never fixed. It's always in flux, no matter how beautiful they are. Even if they don't seem to age, like people like Brooke Shields. And I mean, like 40 years later, they still look like they're 20 years old, right? So everybody suffers that, including the people we think that would never have that issue. Specifically within the Nikayas, Mara is said to be the psychophysical. It says, what is Mara Dhamma? Rupa Vedana Sana Sankara Vijnana, i.e. the psychophysical. The exact same thing exists where Jesus is tempted in the desert by Satan, as is found within the Nikayas, or the tempter, Mara, is personified as this entity. But that's true because that which is evil is the persona. And people don't make that connection. We've actually removed this, like, that this evil is this separate autonomous entity that's tempting us, and that of course is not true. It's not logical. It's not wise to believe something that absurd. And I know some Christians are going to say, one of the greatest tricks of the devil is to convince us that he never existed. Actually, I admit that it exists. What I'm saying is that the source is certainly not what you and most people think it is. But anyway, there's countless passages within the Nikayas where Mara is tempting Gautama, i.e. Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni, by the way, is not a name. Sakyamuni is just ancient Pali, which means Scythian sage. I love it when there's millions of these Buddhists saying, these are their words, Sakyamuni Buddha. Like, that's a name. A Buddha, by the way, is Akim Khan, a non-person. There's no such thing as a physical entity as a Buddha. That's a spiritual appellation of someone that's actually transcended through wisdom. And Sakyamuni is also, too, not a name. It just means Scythian sage. But anyway, getting to the point, where Mara is tempting the historical Gautama. Yeah? Gautama was a real person, by the way. We actually found his ashes in the tope. Tope are those huge funerary mounds that were built. We have countless images of them. His actually ashes are sitting in a metal shelf. And of course his ashes were scattered around everywhere, but one of them, the Piparawi urn, which contained a huge lump of his ashes, is sitting on the second shelf of a metal cabinet in India, in the Anthropological Museum. That's where they wound up, by the way. There's even a video that used to be on Netflix about that. But who is Satan or who is Mara? This tempter is none other than the existential self. So, but human beings, in the case of Jesus, I'm going to use the word Jesus, and in the case of Gautama, we say, well, this person could not have been tempted or full of evil or lustful ideas and desires. It has to be an external entity that is tempting that person. and that is palpably not true. But it is also too superficially true, because that external entity is the psychophysical self, which is an other entity than the transcendent self. Whether you believe this or not is of no concern of mine. However, this is palpably true. It is spoken of endlessly within doctrine, but nobody reads it. Even in the Bible, John, book 3, verse 8, he that doeth sin is the devil. Yeah? He that doeth sin is the devil. John, book 3, verse 8. This evil entity is nothing other than the psychophysical. There's even a brilliant article written by Dr. Anandakitish Kumaraswamy, and it goes over the metaphysics of this. It's an article, it's called Who is Satan and Where is Hell? You can actually download it. So the evil tempter does exist, but it's not like some autonomous entity, living in the bowels of this earth. I mean, that's neither logical nor wise, and it's certainly not sane to think that. But does it exist? And of course it does. It's nothing other than the psychophysical self. As you very well know, this is legion, the many. The many, of course, is the psychophysical. The psychophysical is the many, is the tempter, is that which is constantly tempting. So Jesus being tempted in the desert, the countless passages where Mara is attempting to tempt Gautama, Sakyamuni. These are all 1,000% parallel. There's not even a hair's difference between the two. It is literally the psychophysical self at war with the transcendent self. It's not like some external entity tempting them. You could disagree with me all you want, but you'll still be wrong. Someone sent me a link, and there's a few of them I've seen on, I'm not going to mention this person, that have this cult of personality, and they're all about self-empowerment. My wife, before I met her, she was so hooked up with this nonsense. They sell all these pictures and gurus and trinkets, and there's still all these pictures in the basement of this guru. Before I met my wife, she followed this female guru. The only reason I haven't thrown them away is because they're inside expensive picture frames. They're like, these expensive picture frames, I might use them someday, but I mean, as far as the picture inside, when I need to use the frame, I'll just throw away the picture of this silly guru. It's just a charisma vortex. A lot of these people have enormous charisma. It's like a vortex that attracts. It's kind of like flies to an ultraviolet light, mosquitoes and flies. They get sucked into it. They're all about manipulation. They want to bring you closer to them. Gurus are always pointing to themselves, even if surreptitiously and cryptically. Anybody that has wisdom should be pointing to the absolute or pointing to the divine. Superficially pious, but ultimately, of course, are rotten to the core. Usually, it's like this one guru on the tube. It's like you click the link below and you pay a certain amount of money for premium content. I love it. Premium content. I've kind of lived much of my life by the fact that I'll identify what's evil and what I find reprehensible, and I'll do exactly the opposite. Every book and article that I write is free. I don't pretend to be anybody. I like being nobody, actually. All I'm trying to do is to stay alive and pay the bills and spend the rest of my time doing, what I hope to be important. I read and translate, but I'm not interested in reading and translating. I'm interested in genuine comprehension and insight and wisdom. That's all that's important. Reading and writing is going to get you, because one of my favorite authors who ever lived, Dr. A.K. Kumaraswamy, he died in 1947. I was friends with his son, Dr. Ramapi Kumaraswamy, and he gave me the rights to all of his father's works. As long as you don't charge for them, they're yours to give away. So those rights were given to me by his son. Wonderful. But one thing Kumaraswamy did wrong is, he knew 27 languages, wrote many, many dozens of books, hundreds of articles, most prolific author you could ever imagine. Yet he was going to, even his farewell address to the Boston University of Arts, he said, I'm leaving. Him and his wife were packing up to head to India. He was basically retiring. He was going to spend the rest of his life in deep spiritual retreat. You know, he was done with all of the academic stuff, and he fundamentally didn't like academicians because academicians don't understand anything. So he was a different type of academic. He postponed that to the end of his life, but he waited too long because in the process of packing to head to India and lead the rest of his life in spiritual asceticism, which he said he was going to do in his farewell address, it wasn't like a week or two in the process of packing that I think it was a heart attack, and he dropped dead in his own foyer in his house. So you never know, life is short, you never know when you're going to be cut down. So that was a huge mistake that he made. Not that we don't all make mistakes, but he made that mistake. I try to do the opposite of what these people... You find, if you're wise, you find the stuff that is reprehensible and detestable, and you do the opposite of it. I put a lot of time and effort into articles and books that I write, and I always give them away for free. And these people, they serve themselves rather than wisdom and what's good. Wisdom is its own reward. And boy, oh boy, if you don't believe me on anything I say, you better believe that, because I really mean it. Wisdom is its own reward. But its own reward also, too, doesn't pay the bills. I never feel bad about... And I do sell some leatherwork stuff. It doesn't really pay the bills, hardly. It pays for groceries and some gas and stuff. But, I work hard. My hands right now are sore from, hammering on leather. Hammering on leather. And... I'm not going to feel bad about hammering on leather and, doing hard manual labor and making leather goods. That's a little different than sitting there trying to look pious and holier than thou and, hoping. But I've also, too, people put guilt trip on me, and not recently, for asking for donations, but I don't feel bad about that at all. Because there's nothing wrong with, you're walking on the sidewalk, you see somebody, playing a guitar or something, they have a tin cup out, you could just keep on walking or you could drop a quarter. But, there's a recent tuber, this person has another website, it's like, wow, what a cult of personality. To me, it's so creepy, it's so cringeworthy. Just pictures and trinkets. This is what it is. It's a cult of personality. To me, and it really is, that is pretty close to demonic. I wanted to lead one thing into the other, talking about the two selves, and we've personified, most people have personified Mara or Satan as this person, ab extra to who we are. And it is ab extra to who we are, but it is also that which we are. Not fundamentally, but that psychophysical person. Because there are two within us, and they are at war. The self or the soul is at war with what is not the self and the soul. So the notion of being tempted by the evil one is true. That person you see in the mirror is the evil. That is legion. That is legion. There's what the body wants and what the spirit wants. And in the case of an ignorant person, they're both one and the same thing. There is no fight or struggle when the spiritual and the psychophysical are one. There is no struggle. It's just like a leaf or a turd floating downstream. There's no struggle there. When there's polarization, however, in the case of wisdom, then this happens. The psychophysical self, i.e. Mara, i.e. Satan, and the spiritual self do this number. They polarize, and they spread apart. And when they spread apart, there is tension, and that tension, they butt heads. Until there's complete fulfillment of wisdom, there is that tension because there's polarization and there's struggle. Because wisdom bifurcates oneself. Bifurcation leads to struggle. I hate to use this as an analogy, but there's a conjoined twin, and they share one body. It's two heads. It's two heads in one body, right? And they struggle and have a hard time. That must be a really tough life. But there's two heads and one body. So we have a bifurcated self, and these people struggle. It's like, what are we going to do? I want to do this. I want to do that. There's only one body. You can only do one thing at a time. So there's that. And in the case of wisdom, human beings, in a spiritual, metaphysical sense, they bifurcate themselves like that conjoined twin. Kind of a crude analogy, but I think it's an apropos analogy. I know it is an apropos analogy. This is why ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss because there is no bifurcation in an ignorant person. The spiritual self and the psychophysical self are just like that. One and the same thing, yeah? When there is wisdom, however, then this happens. And then you have polarization of self. And you've heard this before, I know you have. It was someone is really spiritually advanced. Just pick a person, a genuine spiritually advanced person. They say that they're tortured. You've heard this before, whether it's Judeo-Christianity, whether it's Gnosticism, I don't care what it is. A spiritually advanced person is has an enormous struggle. They'll say it's a tortured soul. I know you've heard it. Everybody on earth has heard it, pretty much. It's because they've caused polarization between the psychophysical self and the spiritual self, or the transcendent self. Yeah. It's as simple as that. Metaphysics actually is hyperlogical, and it is divinely simple. Yet people fail to see it. People fail to see it because they lack any wisdom at all. There's nothing difficult to understand about this evil, this psychophysical evil. But if you're okay with it, then you ain't got a problem, you know? Because most people, all they do is they spend their lives worrying about money and food and power and other things. And they are right there with the evil. The spiritual self and the psychophysical self are one and the same. They are one entity. And ignorance is bliss. They float through life, but they also float through life like a turd floating downstream. No struggle. There ain't no bifurcation of self, polarization of self. These people have it easy. The one self and the other self are in perfect harmony. And that's good for a time, but ultimately, people say ignorance is bliss. Like, you're right, ignorance is bliss. But you know what? It's only blissful until in the end when it bites you in the butt, and it will always bite you in the boo-boo. Every time. It's kind of like people that do illicit substances, like, oh man, and I don't do those, by the way. They'll do the substances which are dangerous, like, oh man, the high is awesome. It's like, yeah, but, what about that? They're trying to get off of it, or, it ruins their life, it wrecks their life. It's exactly like ignorance. It's great until it isn't. And it always is going to be until it isn't, because it's always going to bite you in the boo-boo. That's a southern saying, by the way. Bite you in the boo-boo. In other words, it's going to get you in the end. Right there. Anyway, I hope I made that topic kind of simple. I think I did. Explaining it is really quite simple. Thank you. Goodbye.